Well, since I'm recording you, go ahead and do a slate for me.
Do a slate?
Yeah.
Like, what do you want me to say?
Well, just clap.
Clap. Yeah. Clap.
So, welcome to Discography Discussion number 3.
What's up?
Dan!
Hey, Joe. How are you?
Hey, I'm in front of a microphone, and I'm listening to whatever this band is called that we used to open our show.
Right.
And we have a guest this week. We've never had a guest before.
I know.
I mean, we have if you count Josh.
Well, here's the thing about Josh. We originally were going to have this episode be about Slayer. And, so Josh went home and listened to a whole bunch of Slayer and inadvertently, I guess, opened up a portal to hell.
You can still do that?
Yeah, he called me from hell. Apparently the cell service is really good down there.
Wow.
Yeah, Verizon, I think it is. But
that's what I was going to say.
Right. So Josh is currently battling his way out of hell and will be rejoining us for the Slayer episode at sometime soon after he's done talking to the Slayer guys about his adventure of meeting Satan and blowing his head off with a shotgun.
So what band are we going to talk about this week then?
So this week we decided to keep the Christian metal thing going, and we're going to do ZAO. Although ZAO is not really like a Christian metal band, but they were at one time, so I think it's fair to call them that, you know.
And you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, so our guest is Mr. Buddy Reno.
Hello.
Buddy is the ex bass player for the band End of Destiny, and Buddy currently works down in Tennessee. And where are you living now, Buddy? Is it Knoxville?
No, it's
not
Spring
Knoxville.
Hill, which is
Spring
probably
Hill.
like 20 miles south of Nashville, something like
That's
that.
right. Yeah, that's right. I've actually been there. I'm just being a jerk-hole friend.
And since you're our first remote guest, I'm going to be that guy that says, what are your qualifications for metal?
Yeah, so what do you... Yeah, like we're going to put you on the spot right now.
Okay, so let's see. Pretty much Dan Terry and I discovered extreme death metal together.
Yes, we did. It was romantic.
He dived down the route of listening to X-Toll first.
Yes.
And I discovered Soul Embraced, which was Rocky Gray's, the drummer of Living Sacrifice's side project.
Come on, dude. It
Found
was
them first,
basically
and
Living
then-
Sacrifice.
Yeah, pretty much. And so
Same
then I
band.
just kind of succumbed to the entire thing.
Right. Me and Buddy have been friends for a very long time.
Hey, what am I,
Yes.
chopped liver?
Yeah, Joe is just like this piece of shit we found on the side of the road. But no, he... no,
Why
Joe...
not joke
Do
with
I look
Dan?
as pale as I feel?
Yes. Embrace the paleness.
The Soul Embrace. We need to talk about Soul Embrace, dude.
We do at some point,
Well,
yeah.
wait,
Yes, that would be a good
That's
set.
happening, yeah.
Not right now. We're talking about ZAO now.
No.
Right, it's all about ZAO tonight. Yeah.
So, Dan, who is ZAO?
A whole crap
ZAO,
ton of members.
well, technically ZAO is Dan Wan, Scott Mellinger, Russ Cogdell, Marty Lunn, and Jeff Gretz.
All right, thanks for giving me the band list. Now you want to give me an actual rundown of the band?
Maybe.
Come on, tell me the Dan story about ZAO.
Okay, so ZAO, right? Oh, man, ZAO. Okay, so back in the day, me and Buddy were really into this band called Living Sacrifice. Like, really into them.
Yeah.
Like, if they blew their nose in a handkerchief, we would smell the handkerchief, like that. They were the band, the extreme metal band that we were really big fans of. We liked X-Toll before, too, but there was something distinctly America about Living Sacrifice. Like the fact that they're from Little Rock, Arkansas, and they were just, I don't know, they were heavy and really extreme. And everybody used to be like, oh, you like Living Sacrifice? Well, have you checked out ZAO? And me and Buddy were always a little bit apprehensive about ZAO because this was after Dan Wayne had joined on vocals. So, like, when people said ZAO, all we would think about was that raspy, sandpaper, guttural growl.
Yeah.
Snarl.
This was around the time that the remake of All Else Failed came out in 2003.
Yes. I brought that over to Buddy's house. He was playing
Zone
of the Enders on PS2.
Yeah.
And we only know that because we know the song, and it probably reminds us of that game.
Yeah,
but,
Resistance.
Yeah, we listened to Resistance, and I was like, dude, this is the best ZAO song. And Buddy listened to it, and he was like, Definitely agree. So after that day, it was all about finding ZAO stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. Like, we had heard previous stuff before, but not much.
Yeah.
But there was something about, I don't know, something that day clicked with that album, and we just started diving in and finding the previous albums that ZAO had released and just completely fell in love with it.
Yep. Had to complete the discography at that point.
That's true.
Is ZAO guilty of always having a consistent sound, or is it a band that's changed over time?
Oh, they've changed a lot over time.
Yeah.
Starting off as a hardcore band, like the original All Else Failed, not the re-recorded one with Sean Jonas on it, is it's definitely got more of that like late '90s hardcore vibe, sounding kind of like they remind me a lot of the band Overcome, who was another Christian hardcore band from the '90s. I think they borrowed a lot from Overcome, only they're a little bit more melodic and they're maybe a little bit more technical. But to be honest, with ZAO, I remember hearing the very first album I heard by ZAO was Parade of Chaos, which was very, very kind of far into their career, at least at that point. Like, what was it, like 2003, 2004, or something like that?
Yeah, you're almost looking at 10 years.
It was 2002.
Was it? Well, we probably didn't hear it till 03 or 04.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember going to the record store being like, where is, Parade of Chaos by ZAO? It came out this week,
ZAO is a group that I didn't really discover until later because they had put out a documentary DVD after they made the record Funeral of God.
Right.
And I never could get into them until I watched that, and something about watching a documentary about a group that's been around at that time for a little over 10 years, it humanized them, which made whatever they do make sense to me.
Yeah, because I remember, Joe, I would show you ZAO because me and Buddy were just like ridiculous about ZAO. Like, everybody would be like, oh yeah, I'm really into this band. I really like Nickelback. Do you guys do anything like that? And we're like, oh, you should definitely listen to ZAO. It was.
We would intentionally lead people down.
Yeah, we would troll people really heavily about ZAO, and the thing about ZAO is that they were so abrasive. I mean, those vocals of Dan's are just so ridiculous that even now in 2017 it still takes people by surprise. It's startling, like people know that like screaming metal exists, but like, do they know that there's like guttural snarling, just evil sounding vocals? Because this isn't like black metal. Like, this is some kind of weird combination of like hardcore screaming, death metal, and black metal screaming. It's all mixed together into this sound that it is uniquely ZAO.
It's a sound you've not heard in very many other places.
Not really. During the height of ZAO's popularity, there were a lot of bands that copied that style of vocal, but with ZAO, they were kind of the originals, and they're kind of the only ones that have stuck with it over the years. I can't think of any bands out right now that have that vocal style.
Yeah.
I've always described Dan Wayant's style of vocals as Napalm Death done by the fat kid who smoked 2 packs a day while he was a senior.
I could see that.
Because they definitely have a sound that comes from their region, their community, their group of friends and people that they hang out with, but it's not unique. Like, nobody plays guitar like Jimi Hendrix, some people say. No band sounds like Metallica. I don't know a band that sounds like ZAO throughout their career.
No.
And that's talking about the old ZAO and the new ZAO.
Right.
There's a consistency that you hear that you can't quite put a finger on as you go through their discography.
It's Scott.
Yeah, that is Scott.
Scott's
even though he's not even on a couple of the albums, there's still a sound there that is core to the ZAO experience.
Right. So I guess what we always do with the discography discussion is we kind of always take it back to the beginning and work our way up to the modern day. So it all started in 1995?
Yes.
With All Else Failed?
band
And-
not originally created by, but a band that was spearheaded by their first drummer, Jesse Smith.
Yes, Jesse Smith, probably the most consistent member of ZAO. From the beginning, he was on all the original stuff. They had a different vocalist when they started named Eric Reeder, and I have to say that I really haven't heard much of the stuff that they recorded, like demos, with him on it. Almost everything I know about the early ZAO is featuring vocalist Sean Jonas.
Yeah, that's all of my knowledge as well. But even then, this particular album that we're talking about, I've not actually gotten to hear.
Yeah, Buddy's never heard the original All's Failed because it's actually kind of hard to find. If you go on Amazon.com, it's like there's a few people that have it on sale, but it's like $46. And I do love ZAO, but I don't know if I love them $46 enough. So, I
Especially
definitely.
when it's not the members that you like, that you're familiar with.
I mean, it's not that I dislike the members of the original ZAO. That wasn't the band I was introduced to. I came to appreciate the older ZAO later, because of my appreciation for early 90s or mid 90s Christian hardcore. And this is unique too, in that like one of my favorite Christian hardcore bands from the early 90s was Focused. I keep saying early 90s, but it was really more like mid 90s, like 1995 on, but they remind me a lot of like bands like Focused, where the message almost took precedence over the music, but the music was still good.
Well, Sean Jonas was very outspoken and very focused in a way similar to what we talked about with Steve Rowe, where it was about the message to him.
Right.
So that was the reason he was there. The music and the hardcore that you got out of him was secondary.
Well, one thing I have to say about All Else Failed, though, is that so I like bands like Focused, and I like bands like Overcome and Unashamed, and like I love those old Christian hardcore bands. But I would say ZAO at this point in their career was probably the most musically interesting of all of those bands. They were more technical. I wouldn't necessarily say they were more heavy, because there were some pretty heavy Overcome and like No Innocent Victim songs at that time. But for the most part, ZAO, they were more technical than the other bands in the scene. And I felt like in a lot of ways they could go toe to toe with a lot of the secular hardcore bands that were out there at the time. And so All Else Failed is a record that really survives as a hardcore record because of its passion. Sean Jonas screams his lungs out on this record. And it sounds really sincere. It sounds really emotional. And I don't feel like I feel like this with some Christian bands that like I'm being fed a product. Like they're giving me decent music in order to entice me to check out a religion or a certain state of mind. With ZAO, I feel like Sean Jonas is literally screaming this stuff at me because he thinks it's going to save my life. And like that passion really carries the record. The drums sound pretty good.
I mean, I've kind of got to just go with what you're saying on it, but I mean, I could understand like your sentiment just based on the same type of lyrical intensity and musicality that is featured on their follow-up album, the Splinter Shards of Birth of Separation.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of the same songs are on Splinter Shards that are on All Else Failed. So like, if you don't have All Else Failed, there's really no reason to be upset, because Splinter Shards has a lot of those songs.
Yeah, Splinter Shards, and I'm going to be quoting the Lesser Lights of Heaven documentary DVD a lot tonight, because that's kind of the first exposure to ZAO that I had. So that's where the information is ingrained in my brain. But they talk about Splinter Shards being, they got signed to Tooth and Nail, and it was they wanted to get a record out, so they recorded what they had, but they needed more, so they used some of the material that was on All Else Failed. And it's very interesting to hear the performances differently, because they almost sound like a band that was recorded live.
Yes.
Not that they were in a hurry, but just let's put some emotion on here that's different from the last album. You could tell this band had been playing out a lot.
They were more professional sounding. On All Else Failed, a lot of the versions of these songs, while they are more emotional, and in certain cases, like they're my favorite version of some of those songs. On the Splinter Shards Birth Separation, they sound like a much more professional band.
Yeah, even the recording itself is just it stands up to other recordings that are made, today. It's got very good quality. You can hear everything going on.
Yeah, the separation of
no
instruments and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Splinter Shards sounds good. It plays good, and I love Splinter Shards because there are some songs on there that aren't on the other ones. There's a song. Shoot, I can't remember the name of that second song. It's my favorite. Surrounds Me. That's my favorite one on that record. Because there's this little melodic bit where Sean Jones is like, "Your glory surrounds me." It's like just I don't know. It hits that. it kind of approaches that same emotional intensity that I found on All Else Failed. I love those early ZAO records a lot. And the band, it's a testament to how great of a band they were and everything. But let's be honest, when anybody talks about ZAO, what are we really talking about?
We're talking about when Dan Wayne came
We're
in.
talking about what came later. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do. I love All Else Failed. I love Splinter Shards. Would not have given them the time of day without knowing what I knew about the band that came after. So I think 1996, 97, everyone drops out of ZAO except Jesse. Yeah, I have this vision of him sitting alone at his drum kit, okay.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Right. So
they basically all quit following their 1997 Cornerstone appearance.
Correct.
And
they're gone.
I can imagine they're sitting in Cornerstone and all the members are like, "Hey, we're leaving, but we're still going to play a few shows on the way back." So,
is there a story behind that we know?
I do not know. I've never heard of that before until I was just kind of perusing the Wikipedia article and was like, "Oh, that they left it right after Cornerstone." That's
I didn't know that either. I'm not sure if Wikipedia is right on that or not.
It could be. Might not be.
I hadn't heard that, but it's possible. I mean, I know everybody left.
It's in a ZAO biography by some guy named Ryan Downey.
Ryan Downey. Yeah, Ryan Downey was their manager.
There might be some truth to that then.
Maybe he still is their manager. I don't know if he is or not.
Oh, I kind of want to see.
Oh, if it was Ryan Downey, then it's true.
Okay.
For sure. But
interesting.
So yeah, they put out the Splinter Shards. They're a phenomenal, 90s hardcore band. And then Blood and Fire Bring Rest comes out. New lineup. There were some guys that were in other bands. They talk a lot about this on the ZAO DVD. I don't even know why we have to have a discography discussion since that DVD exists. But we're going to do it anyway.
Do you want to just watch the DVD and commentate on that, Mystery Science Theater 3000 style?
Honestly, I think we probably will do that at some point. So
that would be worth a watch. But again, it's been a while.
So with ZAO, Blood and Fire Brings Rest is kind of like a blueprint for Christian metalcore. A lot of ways, Living Sacrifices Reborn was the same way. You kind of had two different paths. Where Blood and Fire Bring Rest, just for anybody that doesn't know, sounds nothing like the Splinter Shards, The Birth of Separation. This is a whole different dragon.
You've got pretty much an entirely new band except for Jesse Smith on drums.
Correct.
And so, they don't have a bassist either, but they got two guitars.
Well, there's bass on the album, but yeah.
Yeah, there's bass on the album, but that was written by Russ and Brett Detar.
Right.
Russ Cogdill, to be specific there.
There's only one Russ in ZAO.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we all know who Russ is.
Right.
But in case somebody doesn't know. But this album is still an instant classic. It didn't sound anything like the previous stuff, which was very not that it's a bad thing, not trying to say that, but the previous albums were very Christ-centered and dealt with praising God and things of that nature.
Right.
But
it was very biblical.
Yeah, Blood and Fire lyrically, it changed that format and it started to deal with personal problems and
real stuff.
Real stuff. Yeah, deep-seated feelings. For instance, the one that sticks in my mind the most is the second track, To Think of You Is to Treasure an Absent Memory.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just brutal.
Oh, yeah.
But Dan wrote
But
that after,
melodic.
what was it, a friend of his or was a relative committed suicide?
I think it was a friend of his committed suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he wrote that song immediately upon hearing that news and went to wherever they were, doing their demo recordings and just belted it out. And
yeah, it was pretty great.
You could still feel the raw emotion coming from that song.
So I don't think there's any way to describe Dan's vocals. I mean, don't get me wrong, the music's great. It really is great. But the thing that was the craziest about ZAO at the time was the voice. Dan's voice always sounded to me like a whisper. A little bit. Like if you could scream through a whisper. Like, it's just very... it's gravelly, it's sandpapery. It sounds like there's definitely blood in his throat when he's doing it.
It sounds like he's definitely screaming from the throat instead of from the gut.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And honestly, the first time I heard it, it was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. I mean, I had heard Extol before that, but Extol's vocals, because we were really big fans of Extol's Undeceived album. But those vocals seemed a little bit like computer processed. It's not like that on Blood and Fire at all. It just sounds like a dude screaming into a microphone.
Yeah.
And so it's like unreal. Like, I mean, the very first time I ever saw ZAO live, like I didn't believe ZAO, like that those vocals were real until I saw it live. Like I saw a human...
That kind of sound could naturally come out of someone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that was Joe's biggest problem with it originally, was that it sounded completely inhuman.
ZAO is a group that, and I'm speaking about the Dan Wayant ZAO, when I say this, even if you have a reference point, the first time you hear it, it's almost completely incoherently inaudible.
Yeah.
Because let's say you've listened to Napalm Death. If I gave you ZAO, if that was your expectation was what you're going to get from listening to Napalm Death, you still wouldn't be able to understand a word he says the first time.
No.
It almost takes 2 or 3 listens, or at least the desire to listen to the other records, and then some point your ear becomes tuned to Dan Wayant's style of screaming, to where even when it does sound incoherent, you can translate it in your mind.
Yeah, you can hear it.
And Blood and Fire, they don't openly talk about it, but Blood and Fire always sounded to me like... It always sounded like the record that came after the band that made All Else Failed in Splinter Shards. Because the voice is not completely in the Dan Wayant zone that we will get later.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think there was still a bigger focus on hardcore versus metal on Blood and Fire. So what you had are like quick, punchy, more mochy tunes. That you could tell some of those riffs were made for kids in the pit.
And,
I can agree with that.
And Brett Detar's style of dissonant metal.
Chaos, yeah. I mean,
it's very distinctive, and it will come up again later, even though this is the only album he was featured on.
Right. I mean, the chaos of ZAO, I think, was very Brett Detar, in the beginning. A lot of the songs that he wrote had a very dissonant, almost like what Norma Jean would capitalize on later. That dissonant, feedback-soaked style. Could all been Russ too, but I'm just gonna say it was Brett because the next record didn't sound like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
And Russ was on both records, so there you go.
This is still an album that I pull up frequently, and when I want to listen to some ZAO quickly.
Yeah, I mean, and even the cover deserves some mention. I mean, it's a dude with fire and coming out of both eyes in his mouth, like literally every orifice in his face is erupted with fire, and that's, I mean, basically what the album sounds like. I mean, it sums it all up.
Yeah, what I love too is that there isn't even the title on the cover of the record. It's
it's just pure ZAO. Yeah,
and it's got this painted, it's a painted type picture, and so it's just got a very, almost, no, I can't say that. I was gonna say Dan Quiggle, but it's
Dave
not
Quiggle.
really.
Yeah,
it's almost like that, but it's very smudgy instead of hard lines.
Yeah, I love it. I love that cover a lot. Unfortunately, I never was able to get a vinyl copy of this record, but I think the vinyl release of this had a different cover than that.
But they've re-released, I think, all of their records up to this point on vinyl at some point.
I don't know if they've released all of them. I know they did Blood and Fire, and they did Liberate.
Blood and Fire's got one. Broken Circle Records.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it just took me to their main page.
Yeah. But yeah, I never did get my hands on those because I wasn't into vinyl then. I got into vinyl, I don't know, like a few months ago. I've been like big about vinyl, but before that I was okay with my CDs and tapes.
For anybody that wants to know how this all started, Dan started collecting vinyl again.
Yeah, pretty much. Then I was like, we should talk about bands' discographies.
So you can figure out what's worth buying.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about ZAO that always rings true is they have a sound that they have tried very hard to stick with. And this was the time period when Brett was in the band where they were touring with no bass player.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's something that I wonder what the thought process was, or maybe it was just we could try to find a bass player, or we could go out on tour. I know that there was a common meme amongst underground bands at this time where if you were supposed to be a complete lineup, you didn't need that person in the band.
Right.
Like, find me the band that went out on tour without a drummer.
Right, yeah.
The Brett Detar style that I mentioned, very much based on open chords, dissonance. It's I can make a sound in this one position.
Right.
And not every song on the next album was written by their lineup at that time.
No, well, I mean, because Brett Detar was still on the EP, the one that the split they did with Training for Utopia.
Yeah.
And that had an original song called Walk On By, Walk On Me, which is like maybe the heaviest ZAO song. I'm not sure. It's a very brutal, almost out of character for the band. Because ZAO's sound is a little bit more uniform. Like, it's not necessarily pure chaos, but close. This song really pushes the limit, I think.
It also has
of
a
what
very
ZAO's
underground, lengthy title. Walk on by, walk on by, walk on by, walk on me. The pianist's prophecy.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, right?
The penis prophecy.
The penis prophecy. Yeah, that's what I heard.
Here it comes.
Right. But yeah, it was just a really heavy song. I mean, like, oh my God. Like, the beginning is just like slow, and Dan gets into like some almost guttural death metal vocals on that song. I mean, it blew me away when I heard it, because I got that EP for like $2 off Amazon and was completely blown away, not only by Training for Utopia being, an insane band anyway, but having the two ZAO songs on there. There's a copy of there's a early version of Skin Like Winter on that. This obviously was written by Brett, maybe, at least it was written while Brett was in the band. So that version is extremely like lo-fi and brutal and crazy. And Ryan Clark from Training for Utopia does a guest vocal spot on that song. On the EP version, it sounds just like he sounds in Demon Hunter now. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I've never heard that version because, Skin Like Winter is probably one of my favorite ZAO songs of all time.
Oh, yeah. I almost prefer the split EP version of it better to the album version.
I'll have to listen to that because I've never heard it.
It's really good.
So, speaking of the album version, what is the next album in this timeline?
So, the next album is Liberate TX in Ferris, which I now know is just a quote from the movie Event Horizon. And I hope you like Event Horizon because there's clips from that movie all over the album.
Yeah, and Liberate TX in Ferris means to save yourself from hell, which, funnily, it says that on the cover of the album.
Yeah, Solid State really ran with the whole hell theme of it.
So who wants to tell the story about the label taking over the layout of this record?
Right. So in the DVD, we reference the DVD a lot. Jesse Smith says, he's like, so I had a bunch of tattoos. He's like, and a couple of the tattoos had like 1950s like pinup girls on them. And Tooth and Nail actually went in and edited the pinup girls out of his tattoos in the linear note in the liner note photos. Which is weird because I've never actually seen that version of it, because the version I have, the pinup girls are on his arms. So, go me, I guess. But, like, so it was,
Well, if you're looking at this record, what you see on the cover is just a close-up of what is Jesse Smith's eye.
You're right, it's Jesse Smith's face.
But
He's got tons of makeup on,
But when you open the album, you see all the linear notes, and even the track listing like has this Dante's Inferno theme that, according to the band,
they had nothing to do with.
Yeah. They didn't. It wasn't planned that way. It's not a concept album or anything like that. It's just another album of 10 songs, because ZAO is notoriously a 10-song band.
Right. And this was the record, too, where I think ZAO really kind of moved away from the whole... Like, I would almost argue that they weren't a Christian band as early as Liberate, in the sense that none of their songs are really about that. I think Desire the End talks a little bit about the end times and stuff, but the lyrics on Liberate are much more mature, I think, like mature themes. If Liberate was a movie, it would be rated R, like it was a little bit crazier. The song Savannah, they said, was about a adult film star who, her face was destroyed in a terrible accident, and she could no longer, she was no longer considered beautiful or whatever. Like, and that's just like, you don't hear that kind of stuff on like your typical like Christian hardcore album.
Yeah.
And so that was weird and different. I never understood what the lyrics were about that until I watched the DVD, and they kind of explained it. That
Skin Like, the one that always stuck out for me from the DVD was when he explained Skin Like Winter was, now that Jesse at this point when the DVD came out was out of the band, that Skin Like Winter was actually written about Jesse Smith, and he didn't really know it at the time.
Right? How many times do you think he played that song live? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Not really knowing that that's what it was about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Liberate is probably my favorite ZAO album. Had a new guitarist on this one, Scott Mellinger, and he was just a phenomenal, just like sludgy, heavy, distortion-soaked guitarist. And a lot of the songs on Liberate are just very sludgy, kind of have almost like a Crowbar Neurosis type of sound it.
It's funny that you say it has like this sludgy sound, because I actually, on this record, I kind of attribute the guitar to having this like sonic edge to it.
Yeah.
There's something like metal shearing across metal that the guitars have that definitely didn't exist in the last album. There's just something like raw about the guitar sound in this.
Yeah.
Like it does have a sludgy feel to it because they feel really low and thick.
Yeah.
But when the note finishes its ring, it has this shear to it that I haven't heard on any other ZAO record for that matter.
Yeah, it almost cuts you, like a razor blade, and it's
my ears are bleeding.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's I almost want to say it's lo-fi, but it isn't really lo-fi. I mean, the vocals are more buried in the mix here than they are on because I feel like on Blood and Fire, like the vocals were the center point of the band. I mean, the music was really good too, but the vocals were up in the mix. You could hear them very loud. The vocals were almost more piercing, I think, than the guitar on Blood and Fire. Whereas on Liberate, the vocals, they don't really take a back seat, but they're not like the guitar. The guitar rules Liberate.
Yeah, Dan is not necessarily buried in the mix, but he's definitely more like at the same level with the band.
Yes.
And the guitar sound then can shine.
It almost sounds a little bit more like a live sound, which I know, like, The Fear is supposed to sound like more of a live sound. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But
funny fact, the 10th song on this album called Man in Cage, Jack Wilson.
Yeah.
Which I think it's just 7 minutes of just instrumentals. I don't think there's even any vocals that I can remember.
Creepy building drums
creepy
and stuff. Yeah, it creeps me out still to this day.
They got the title of this song came from the credits of what's that movie again?
Event Horizon. Yeah.
There's a credit in there that says Man in Cage.
Jack Wilson.
The Man in Cage was Jack Wilson. And they just thought it was funny, and so they made that the title of the song.
Well, and I really connected to this record, especially after seeing the DVD and like Jesse saying that like him and Dan used to just sit up all night, listen and watch like really messed up movies and stuff. And like it's funny because like I can't help but harken back. Buddy and I used to do a radio show local in St. Louis.
Just about to mention that.
Yeah, we used to do a radio show, and it was from midnight to 2 a.m. It was like a Christian metal hardcore radio show, and I remember we would go back to Buddy's apartment after doing the radio show, and we would watch really messed up movies like all night, And,
we'd rent like weird horror movies from Italy, like Zombie.
Yeah, the original Zombie, and
Italy.
Yeah, it was just low grade, almost VHS quality movies, and we would watch those, and we watched The Prophecy with Christopher Walken, which
the first one, right? The good one, right?
What, Zombie?
You were a soul. Where would you hide?
Oh no, Prophecy.
Oh, Prophecy. Yeah, it was the very first one, and actually, that whole dialogue that whole monologue from the beginning of the song "Ravage Ritual" on Blood and Fire is taken from the Prophecy.
Movie.
Yeah, it's like slowed down, but yeah, you get to hear the whole thing. And
the other thing about Liberate that I mentioned earlier about the Brett Detar style of dissonant metal, you get a very clear picture of that in this album. You can tell which songs Scott Mellinger wrote and which songs were written by Brett Detar.
For sure.
Because Scott Mellinger's style is much more melodic and how dirty can I make the next chord sound, almost like George Harrison used to do. Like if there was a dissonant chord in a Beatles song, you knew that came from George Harrison.
Right.
Scott Mellinger, same way.
Right.
And it mixes together so well that this is considered by many to be the masterpiece of ZAO.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love that record so much. And I even have to agree with Jesse Smith when he says he feels like the first record was Liberate. Like the ZAO that we know now. Liberate plays such a huge role in that.
Yeah, because I mean, on this record for the next couple of years here, Dan, Scott, Russ, and Jesse, minus
Horner.
Rob Horner on bass, who was only on for another album. That's ZAO.
That's the band I think of. Yeah, when I think of ZAO.
I mean, even up to today, but minus Jesse Smith, that's still ZAO.
Yeah.
And so this is definitely the beginning of what ZAO is now.
Right. I mean, and that record was very dark and depressing. I mean, I remember showing that record to people and them being like, where's the hope, Dan? Like you can't listen to such depressing music, and it sounds demonic with the vocals, and I don't know how you could call yourself a Christian and listen to this kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh, you think that's crazy? You should listen to some of the other stuff I've been checking out. And ZAO they just blew me away, man. And this was definitely like a high school band. For me, like 100%. Like I used to joke that anybody that heard ZAO heard about it from me. Like even though they were this huge band across the country at the time, I was so obsessed with ZAO. I mean, I'd be sitting in class and writing the ZAO logo on like literally everything that passed in front of me. I put ZAO. I remember one time in art class, like I basically recreated the Liberate cover artwork on a notebook, and just like with the face and the fingers and just everything. And I was obsessed. I mean, the super fan, 100%. I just couldn't I every time I listen to that record, there was always something new for me to go back to, and
There's still things that I pick up now that I didn't hear before, especially because, like MP3 players were kind of just coming out when we got a hold of this record.
Right.
And, you're trying to squash as much stuff as you can fit on them because, they only held so much.
Right.
So we're listening to these records at like 192, 60 something or other.
192
Right.
if you were lucky. It was like 128 for me for
Oh,
like
yeah.
5
128,
years.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie.
Yeah,
I
true.
listened to most of ZAO's discography at 96K.
Which makes it even more
Which is horrible. Yeah. I
You
mean,
used to drive around with your laptop in your passenger seat.
I did,
and all your
man.
albums were writ to WMA 96K. Oh, it's good enough.
this
no,
was before the iPod, okay? So, I mean, it was.
this was during the iPod. It was just that was all you had.
I had a 15 gigabyte hard drive in my laptop, it just, and I would listen to these records and just, listen to how heavy this is. And
I had this Camaro with two front speakers, and that was it. And they were broken.
I remember
and
that.
I would blast ZAO out of that.
Yeah.
Like,
and you would
if that
kill
was how
the
you were-
bass and
All the
drive
time,
me nuts.
Well, they didn't need bass. It was more like ZAO Live, all right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
What's that screeching? Is that Dan?
Right.
Oh no, that's actually the speaker. Oh no, wait, that was Dan.
right. Yeah. Yes. I mean, the lyrics were more mature. The music was heavier. It was sludgier. It was terrifying in a lot of ways. And still terrifying. So the next record that they you come into the self-titled and you get kind of a different ZAO on this one because you put in 5-year winner and it's sludgy and
Now, to note for this band at least, Russ had left at this time.
I don't think he was on the self-titled. Yeah, I'm not 100%.
Yeah, he's not on self-titled.
He's not on Parade of
that
Chaos.
also-
Like this was the era of all the songs were written and recorded by Jesse and Scott,
right.
and then Dan
Yeah.
would show up and do vocals,
Right.
Yeah.
which makes me wonder why I still don't have that sometimes. Because if this is two guys, I mean, barring the digital drums,
Sounds pretty good.
this is good.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
But this is what you get when you listen to Nine Inch Nails and say, I could play that.
right. That's got to be what Jesse was thinking when they did that. Was like, we're gonna do a digital type album. I mean, the drums were all digital, which bothered me a little bit. I mean, I think he was playing on a digital kit, but so it was still a performance. But it just sounds weird, and I think it takes away a little bit from the impact that some of those songs could have had. Like I always imagine what 5-year winner would sound like recorded with real drums. Like it would sound, I think, a little bit more intense than what we get. Self-titled was weird though. It had a lot of instrumental songs on it.
Yeah.
It had sort of a kind of a pseudo-industrial feel to it. Dan's vocals are probably like the loudest they've ever been, like over the music. Which it was just really weird hearing this like 9 Inch Nails type sound, but then you've got ZAO in there too. Like it's like you're listening to a 9 Inch Nails record and you're listening to a ZAO record in one speaker and a 9 Inch Nails record on the other speaker, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what.
And there's a couple of songs in here where I don't even know if Dan is even on them.
There's
like-
a few he's not. Yeah,
Yeah, like Witch Hunter. I don't think Dan's even on that one.
yeah. I don't think that's him. I think that's all Jesse.
Yeah, and The Dreams That Don't Come True, track 9. That's like a completely slow song.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, and that's like probably the first like slow song with vocals, like actual song
Yeah.
that they've actually written on an album, which is very interesting. It's a very good song, but again, I don't think Dan's even on that one. I
No,
think that
he
might be
is.
Jesse singing.
No, he
Or
is.
not album song. Dan is singing.
Dan's
on
on
that
there. I think that's him singing actually,
one? Okay.
because it sounds like him, like with the spoken word parts and stuff. It's a deeper register. I think that actually is Dan singing on those on that song, and he does scream on that one too. So it's very obviously
Yeah.
him.
I unfortunately, since this is kind of the last minute podcast, wasn't able to go back and re-listen to this album, to get a complete refresher on it. But,
Yeah.
just coming from memory, that's probably one of my favorite songs on the record, along with 5-Year Winner and A Tool to Scream.
Tool to Scream was really good. Starts off as kind of like almost like a creepy jazzy intro to that one. I don't know if jazz is the right word for it, but it's definitely creepy and awesome. It's a slower paced song too, but it just really builds up. I remember hearing them play that song live, and it just because it starts off like really slow and kind of like downtrodden, and then like it goes into just complete chaos after that. I mean, it just kind of explodes in your face like a firecracker, like.
That's one of those ones that is really fun to see live.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So you both are reminding me of something that I've noticed about hardcore ZAO fans. A lot of ZAO fans live in kind of a strange bubble where you almost forget that there's material that Jesse Smith sang on.
Oh, yeah.
Even though when you hear it, you're like, oh, that's such a good song. Like, I'm thinking of Angel Without Wings because it has both Dan and Jesse singing.
Does it?
Yes, it does.
I thought that was all Dan.
And we're going to get to that when we talk about Parade of Chaos, but you hear stuff on here like Witch Hunter.
Yeah, Witch Hunter is Jesse. There's
Jesse.
one that's called like FJL.
Yeah.
But
and you almost forget.
It says it's an instrumental, but Jesse's definitely singing on that. Like,
yeah,
it's weird that they said it was an instrumental.
Yeah, looking on darklyrics.com here, there's definitely lyrics for that. It's at least a paragraph.
Yeah. And like, I mean, this record was weird. It had weird lyrics. Like there was a song about them being like pissed off about people talking trash about them on their message boards.
Yeah, which is called Trash Can Hands.
Trash Can Hands, yeah. But it's actually one of the more brutal songs on the record,
Yeah, which is funny because like one of the lyrics on this song is pout, pout, boo hoo, talk, talk, pout, boo hoo, hoo.
Right, and you could definitely tell that Jesse wrote that,
yeah.
Because it's completely not like something you'd hear from Dan, like... He screams it, but I definitely don't think he wrote that.
And I mean, he even calls out two of the people that he did not like with their username handles.
Right?
DXD Boy and Fire Kid.
Yeah, whoever they are.
We wrote this song for you.
I don't think they were me and Buddy, but who knows?
Way to be all hip hop about it,
right? Well, and then there was that song, "The End of His World." Which is, just seems like it's going to be like a regular ZAO song or whatever. And then you've got Dan screaming, the music's, punching you in the face, and it's heavy, it's extreme or whatever. And then you just hear Jesse Smith in the background going, he didn't know, she didn't know he was going to die. She didn't know he was going to die. It just sounds really weird. I don't know how that fits or if he was just doing it to be a dick or what, but it just doesn't flow, quite like it should. I mean, it doesn't ruin the song necessarily, but it's like definitely not something I'd whip out and show my friends. Like, check out this band ZAO.
It's definitely an odd point in the album because they've never really done like they've done talking parts, but they've never really done like gang vocal parts without the gang.
Well, yeah, and I also kind of like get the impression that maybe they didn't care as much on this record. So they would just kind of do stuff that didn't really work. Because like one of my favorite songs on the CD is the song "At Zero" at the very end. It's like the heaviest ZAO song ever, but like totally like there's nothing to it at all. It's just blast beats and screaming. I'm at zero. It's just like straight blast like for like 2 minutes, and then it's just like 5 minutes of noise after that. It's like really kind of weird, and but I love it because I loved ZAO at this point. I was completely plugged in, so like they could have farted for 40 minutes on a record, and I'd been like, "This is an amazing ZAO record,"
I mean, at this point, we had gone to see ZAO at some dive in St. Louis, and they played "A Tool to Scream" live.
Yep.
And that was probably like this was before
before Funeral God came out. Yeah.
I think it was before Funeral God. So this was definitely still the classic ZAO. Jesse was up there on drums, and when they played "A Tool to Scream," there's a part at the end where he just screams over and over the martyr, and you've never seen so many people just eat that microphone. When Dan sticks it out into the crowd, and like it's just a horde that the pit completely closes up and everybody dives for that mic so that we can all participate. Like it's the most intense moment that I've been in a metal show.
I'm gonna adjust your memory a little bit on that show Dan actually wasn't the singer.
He
The
wasn't.
very first time we saw ZAO, it was the guy Josh from
was
Society's
Joshua
Finest.
Ashworth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
It was still good. It was still ZAO.
Go ahead and elaborate on that, Dan, because ZAO notoriously, you don't, until recently, you don't know who you're going to see when you go see live.
Right, yeah, you had kind of a 50-50 shot back then, like,
because it was either going to be Corey Darst
or Dan.
or maybe Dan, and at this point in the career where they don't have a bass player live, he might be playing bass.
Right, yeah, you were lucky if it was Dan there.
Yeah.
Because the first time we saw him, it was with Josh. And then the second time we watched it, it was with Dan.
Yeah, and Joshua Ashworth, if there was a person that could take over for Dan and I would be okay with, it would have been Joshua Ashworth.
Well, yeah, and they talk about that on
yeah.
the DVD too. Like, Scott was like, yeah, we went into he's recording the vocals and we listened to the demo track back and he goes, you know what? This might be okay. This might work. And I don't know what the reasoning was. I remember when they were supposed to be recording the Funeral God album, that they originally, because I remember when we saw him, he said that they were working on a record called Bleed Beautiful. And there were 2 songs that they had released online. One was called 21st Century Thriller, which went on to become The Rising End. And the other one was called She's Not Leaving, She's Not Breathing.
Which became Praise the War
Machine. Yeah. And it's so funny because I listened to the lyrics. I need to go back and listen to that demo and remember what the actual lyrics were on that song, because it's just sort of, he's like, because it's Praise the War Machine, and he's like, I found a body in the backseat of my car. And I just want to know more about that. What was that all about?
No, what's funny is, not really funny, but we're jumping the gun here. Onto Funeral of God. There's still 2 more albums between when they exploded in popularity.
Now, which came first, Parade of Chaos or the re-record, or the 80% re-record, as I've been known to call it, of All Else Failed?
Parade of Chaos.
Parade of Chaos, yeah. That was 2002.
That might have been one of the first ZAO records me and Buddy bought. We bought it at a CD warehouse, and we were listening to it, and so Parade of Chaos is just a wacky as hell record, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I almost feel like they recorded it in a sense of like, this is going to be bad, nobody's going to like it, nobody's going to listen to ZAO anymore after this. But it was
I remember Jesse on the DVD saying that they purposely recorded this in standard tuning just to make people mad.
Yeah,
well, just the songs he was playing guitar on.
Technically true, but yeah, it's. But he said he was playing on like a single kick, bass drum, and just to piss people off.
See, this is by default my favorite ZAO record.
Really,
it's not actually my favorite because that will always be Funeral of God, I think. But I find myself when I want to listen to ZAO and I can only choose one album, like I don't want to shuffle the whole thing. It's usually Parade of Chaos that I pick.
Parade of Chaos is in a way the most chaotic ZAO record, in the sense that it's completely random. Like, you never know what's coming.
And that might be why I always go for it. But
yeah.
It always leans that way. I'm thinking, I want to listen. Yeah, I'll listen to ZAO. Flip through. There's the Funeral of God. There's my favorite. Well, Parade of Chaos.
It's musically weird.
I think it's the album cover, honestly. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's like a giant gunshot. Like, and there's blood splattered out all over the CD case. Like, it's just weird, man. Like, and you open up the book, and it's like, obviously it was pictures of the band members, but their heads are all gone. Like,
you start off with the buzzing. You go to suspension. Yeah, then we're straight into Parade of Chaos, and then Angel Without Wings, which is like your favorite record, where you say now, why doesn't Dan sing all the time?
Right, yeah. I'm pretty sure that's Dan singing.
It's a mixture.
If the band listens to this, they can definitely correct me, because I'd want to know.
Don't talk about the band, or they might show up.
Right, that'd be awesome if ZAO showed up right now to play
all of a sudden the door busts down.
Yeah. Do you know what happens if you go in the bathroom and close the door and look in the mirror and say Scott Mellinger 3 times in the mirror?
Yeah, you get ZAO instantly, and they come to attack you.
Dan shows up and goes, "You want a beer?"
Right.
Can we try that later?
Oh, dude, I really want to try the ZAO beer, but I think it's only available in draft. I don't know if it's available in bottle or not.
See, if you go in the bathroom and you say Scott Mellinger in the mirror 3 times, he will bring you the beer.
Okay, I like that.
We'll talk about this ZAO beer when we get.
What
to
if
the
what if you
latest
say
record.
Jeff Gretz 3 times in the mirror? What do you get?
An onslaught of metal.
Does ZAO show up, or does From Autumn to Ashes show up? Anyway, so yeah, Parade of Chaos is weird. Angel Without Wings is like a very melodic, like almost ballady type song, but like it sounds like a standard rock song, but like you've got Dan from ZAO screaming over it like just like a madman, and there's like melodic choruses, and it's weird, man. Like
it's definitely different. But I think this album has probably one of the coolest openings to a ZAO record ever.
Oh, the buzzing.
Because the buzzing, like, I know we kind of blew past that a second ago, but I mean, you can't forget just like how raw that song is, like just him screaming the buzzing over and over again.
Yeah.
In the beginning, like you just are instantly bombarded, and you have no idea now what is going to be waiting for you. And then the next track kind of has like a traditional-ish, verse, chorus, verse kind of thing going on. And then it just starts going all over the place.
Yeah, Suspension is weird to me, like a weird song. I love it. It's weird that it's like basically about like people that masturbate while strangling themselves. Like that was weird.
Because that was a thing.
You didn't hear that much. You didn't hear much about that kind of stuff on very many like Solid State Records albums, and obviously that didn't come out until a few years later.
I wonder why Dan Wayant had to lie about what the songs were about.
Right? Yeah, there's no way they would have put those records out. At that time, it's just it was a different time back in like 03, 02, 03, and
who could forget the Ballad of Buddy Bixby?
Which isn't even a song. It's like an electric thing.
I'm pretty sure it's Jesse
electric
Smith
interlude.
playing with a keyboard.
Even though the band didn't care about Parade of Chaos, I cared about Parade of Chaos.
I liked Parade of Chaos.
It was cool. It had a bunch of weird songs on it. I mean, it just like and it was weird that more or less served as my introduction to the band. Like
because that was pretty much. I mean, because that was pretty much the first album that we. That you had
physically purchased,
physically purchased, and you showed it to me. I wasn't a big fan of it at the time because it wasn't until Resistance, or not Resistance, the re-recording of All Else Failed came out that I actually got into it.
I got that. I don't remember if I bought that or downloaded it, but I own it now. Just in case anyone's listening, I own the physical.
Go ahead and
disc.
talk about the re-record of All Else Failed, because
okay,
if
so
you talk about the band not caring, they really didn't care.
Yeah, not so much on this one. And it's weird because I still enjoy listening to that re-record because I like hearing the old ZAO songs with the more modern ZAO lineup. It's cool hearing Dan scream those songs and all that, but like, it sounds different. There's parts that are actually changed from the original. And like the version of All Else Failed, the actual song All Else Failed, like that like 10-minute epic All Else Failed, sounds way different on the re-record than it sounds on the original. And the original actually sounds like maybe a little sloppy compared to the re-record. The re-record kind of took the idea of the original and I think made it a little bit better. But yeah, I kind of get the impression they really didn't care about this at all. This was something that they were doing to basically fulfill a record contract because
you would be correct because they did admit that they put this out just so that they could fulfill their record contract with Solid State.
Right, and because they never put anything out for Solid State after that. That was it. There was one more Solid State record ZAO release, which was it was the ZAO Legendary record, which came out before Funeral of God, or maybe came out around the same time. Which had like it was like a greatest hits for not like bands like ZAO have hits, but well,
that's essentially what it was.
Right. It was like a best of ZAO,
plus 3 demo tracks.
Yeah, it did have some tracks that I think featured Corey Darst.
Yes, it did.
Yes.
It had there was one called the Icarus Complex. I don't remember what the other two are called at this exact moment because I don't have the CD in front of me, but.
You had the Icarus Complex, One Last Time, and All Dressed Up.
Yeah.
With No Place to Go.
And I think one of those songs actually, like the main riff from one of the others, it was either the riff from Parade of Chaos or it was from The Buzzing, but one of those songs ended up on Parade of Chaos in a different form. because nerd. But yeah, so I mean, and it's weird. The songs of Corey Darst, they sound pretty good. Like it makes me wonder what a ZAO record with Corey Darst would have sounded like.
Yeah.
I think it probably would have been pretty good. But that's the thing. I love Dan. If given the option of Dan versus anyone else, I'm gonna always pick Dan. Because he is ZAO, 100%. And I think at this point, I think everybody associates Dan's vocals with ZAO. Like that is at its core the ZAO song. Like, so they could fart on a record, and as long as he was screaming over it, it would be good. Like
I wonder what that record would sound like.
it probably would sound like farts with Dan screaming over him. if I had to guess.
This is the end, if you really think about it, of the second iteration of ZAO.
The second era of ZAO.
Because
yeah.
even though the first record of this era that had Brett Detar on it, I still kind of throw those together because ZAO has not yet totally become Scott Mellinger's band. And you know what I mean.
Depends on who you ask.
Well, you know who I mean at this point.
Right.
It wasn't until The Fear where you really got what Scott Mellinger has in mind when it comes to the songwriting.
Yes and no. I think the Funeral of God, it has more Scott in it than even The Fear. But so ZAO breaks up basically after this.
Yeah.
We had all kind of gotten used to ZAO not being a band anymore, which was a bummer because I think Living Sacrifice broke up around the same time. And so it's like, well, who are we going to listen to?
Yeah, it's like you lost two giants in one.
Yeah,
year.
it's like, cool, who are we going to listen to now? The answer is Norma Jean. But,
Ixnay on the Orma Jean May.
Right, we'll talk about Norma Jean a different time. But yeah, but yeah, so we had kind of decided that ZAO was gone. ZAO had kind of decided that ZAO was gone,
Yeah.
So it was weird when I think it was like a year later or something that like all of a sudden they were back.
Yeah,
and they were back with the Liberate lineup.
Almost.
No, it was. It really was the Liberate lineup originally.
Almost. Jesse was gone.
Not yet.
Not
when
yet?
ZAO first came back, Jesse was still in the band.
Oh, really?
Yep. I remember that because I used to read message boards and all kinds of stuff that's probably considered unreliable now. But at the time, because that was actually the first time I saw ZAO was when they came back, and I think Dan was with the band for a short period of time, and then he quit again, and that's when they hired Joshua Ashworth. Because when we saw Joshua sing for ZAO, the very first time we saw them at the Creepy Crawl here in St. Louis, Josh was singing. But other than that, it was the straight Liberate lineup. It was Scott, Russ, Rob Horner, and Jesse Smith. And it was funny because I remember Rob Horner running up to the microphone and doing these really sick backup vocals to the songs. Like that was like my favorite part about it was that, and we really enjoyed that show. It's kind of weird though because like I thought that show was really really good, and I didn't realize until we saw him a year later with Dan and the Funeral of God lineup how shortchanged we actually were at that first show.
Yeah.
Because when we saw him again...
I forgot that was why they did...
Yeah.
That's why they did those 3 demo songs, because they were writing the Funeral of God.
Right.
And they talk about it on Legendary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it wasn't until Dan came back in that they changed the entire concept.
Right, yeah. He came back with lyrics and all that. And it's crazy because... we were totally shortchanged at that first show because the second time we saw them, it was Dan. I remember he had like no shirt on. It was like 115 degrees inside the Creepy Crawl. And like Dan was shirtless and had like huge dreadlocks and was terrifying. Like I remember like we'd be playing the songs and singing and he would just like point directly at me, like point directly into my soul, and be screaming. And we had like a lot of crowd sing-alongs. And I remember we talked to Scott and Russ and everybody after the show for a considerable amount of time, if you remember that. And he was telling us how like Scott was telling us how like Danzig was the greatest band in the world.
I remember I had to go to work the next day, and it was like midnight.
Yeah,
and I was like, man, I really need to go, but I don't want to leave.
Yeah, I couldn't hear anything. Yeah, so because if you remember the first time we saw them, like they pretty much finished playing and then they were all gone.
Yeah.
I think you got Scott to sign like one of your records.
Yeah, I think
Scott was like the only one that hung out after the show, because he's just a cool dude like that, and that was about it. But whenever we went back and saw him a year later, we were the typical fanboys. We were having him sign like all of our records, like and it was awesome. I still love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's this huge hype at the time. Like ZAO was back. They signed to this record label called Ferret Records, and they were coming out with a new album. And what is it called? It's called The Funeral of God. And it's like, oh my God, like if people gave me trouble about listening to Christian music versus not Christian music, like before that, it was like tenfold. when they put out a record, and I was like, no, it's totally a cool album, and it's about like if God died, and they're like, well, damn, the Bible doesn't say that. And I'm like, well, it's like not something that's really happening. It's just an idea in a song,
It's a concept album.
It's a concept album, right? It's the first ZAO concept album, and maybe the only one.
Yeah.
When I talk about Funeral of God, I say, ladies and gentlemen, Steve Peck.
Steve Peck being Joe's personal favorite ZAO drummer.
I admit that.
The drums on this album were amazing.
I'm an old school fan, so I'm going to still stick directly with Jesse Smith.
The interesting
It's my favorite
thing,
ZAO drummer still.
For those that have kept up on it, if you're savvy, you can find demos for almost every song on this album that were done by Jesse Smith. So in reality, what you've got is the first album to feature a different drummer playing his version of Jesse Smith's parts.
Yeah.
So why is this so good?
I think more consistency. The Funeral of God is probably the most like new person friendly ZAO record. Like you can't just show somebody off the street like Pray to Chaos and be like, dude, this is great. They look at you like you have two heads, Funeral of God.
There's a more melodic, thread throughout all of the songs.
They're more like songs. They have verse, chorus, verse type of structure.
Yeah, it's a little less hardcore, a little less traditional hardcore.
Yeah, it's almost more metal in the sense of it's a kind of more grand sounding. Usually I describe stuff like this as up its own butt, but I don't feel like it's quite that way here because it's still ZAO. It's still, scary and like.
There's not a bad song on this record at all.
Not really that I'm aware of. I can definitely listen to this one from beginning to end.
Yeah, I think the only one that I typically skip over is Live from the Funeral of God. I don't know why that one just.
Well, that song's really unsettling towards the end. Like there's this like just dissonant. There's like this dissonant buildup at the end. He's like, there's no reason to be afraid. Everything's under control. It's like really scary. So I like that song still. This one had singing on it. That was kind of new for ZAO. I mean, they did it in Pray to Chaos and they did it in self-titled a little bit, but like it was always just kind of like weird. Like you didn't consider it part of the sound. This was the first record where they really incorporated Scott singing. This is the first record where we hear Scott singing. Like, who knew that dude could sing, That just started happening on the Funeral of God. It was very, very... it was almost jarring for me because I'm just not used to hearing singing on a ZAO record. And like, it wasn't overpowering or anything, but it was different. And it was like a welcome change. Because, I mean, at this point, I still considered ZAO to be like a perfect band. And so to me, like, well, they don't have to sing because they're ZAO. They're perfectly sustainable as they are. And then I hear him singing on these songs, and I'm like, this is a welcome change. Because
it was good. It wasn't like it was, just kind of put out there, even though the guy couldn't sing at all.
Right.
He actually can, and so they did it well and did it in the right parts.
Right, and his singing actually has gotten a lot better over the years. I go back and listen to the Funeral God, and I was like, wow, he really wasn't as good as he was on later albums. But it didn't matter then. It still sounded good to me, and I liked it. And that Funeral God is probably the most like accessible ZAO record. And
I'm glad you said that, because accessible is the word I think of.
Because it was kind of your first time with ZAO, wasn't it, Joe? I mean, like that, the Funeral God was like your first go-to ZAO album.
You had spent a good year and a half, maybe at this point, drilling this idea into my head that ZAO is a good band, which it would not register with me. And like I said earlier, my real exposure was the Lesser Lights of Heaven DVD.
Right.
For whatever
Which
reason,
was released in accordance with this.
The combination of that humanization of the group and that exposure to this album at the same time, it clicked.
Right.
It's like, okay, I get it now. If there's such a thing as having a regional sound or a sound that's based within your community, which I do believe ZAO has, you can tell when a band comes from a certain area, and this has got to be what their area sounds like. It all clicked. It all made sense, and it's good music. It's performed well.
Yeah,
you can perform music like this badly.
Oh, sure.
This is performed well, and that is important when you have a gateway drug like that. It's got to be something that you can get into your system without too much pain.
Right. Well, and you have a big concept that carries it too. I think with this record, the Christian fans were still very much on board, because there were a lot of like biblical themes and stuff to the lyrics, and you could make an argument that the Funeral God is still the Christian ZAO.
Yeah, because the way it ends is with man realizing like that this wasn't the way to go, and
we messed up. Yeah, we pissed
they
him
go
off.
back to just waiting on God to return.
Right. Yeah, that was a big deal for ZAO.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier that the band probably wasn't a Christian band as long as they said they were, or at least as long as their label said they were.
Right.
This may not be the first time where they were kind of being obvious, but the next album really was.
Oh, yeah. The
Fear, you really get the sense that it's not the same band. And I'm going to let you tell the story about The Fear is what keeps us here, because that is the next album in this discography.
So The Fear is a very different ZAO record.
Way to put it.
It was originally going to be called the George Lucas Neck Fat.
The new George Lucas Neck Fat, experience, or was it? No, I think it was just called the George Lucas Neck Fat, wasn't it? That's what Jeff Gretz said it was going to be. So at this point, their bassist that had been on Funeral God quit the band. The drummer Steve Peck had quit the band. So they hired this guy named Marty Lunn on bass, who apparently had been friends with the band for years. And actually, according to a podcast I listened to 2 nights ago with Marty Lunn, originally when Jesse Smith was reforming ZAO with all the guys that are in it now, originally he was supposed to be the bass player. So that would have been interesting that Marty Lunn would have been on like Liberate and Blood and Fire and all that, and kind of a cool.
That would have been.
He said nobody ever even told him that until recently. He's one of my favorite dudes in ZAO. I like all of them for different reasons. I don't really personally know any of them, but it's one of those like his personality's just I like that dude a lot. But yeah, so he played bass on The Fear, and they had this new drummer. It was a huge deal. It was Jeff Gretz. He's this new guy that I hadn't heard of before.
But you realized you had heard a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been on a lot of stuff.
Because he's on everything.
He's been in a lot of bands. Still is, But what's funny about him is it was all about like, I remember them going on and on about how they could play songs like At Zero live. Like that this new guy Jeff was just like all about speed, and like technicality, and like he was the best drummer since Jesse Smith and all that. And
these drums on this album are insane.
They really are
fast. fast.
They're one of the better parts of the record, but
And where was this album recorded?
this album was recorded with Steve Albini, who, if you guys don't know who that is, just turn the podcast right now and just stop listening to metal. But no, Steve Albini, he's most famous for recording. Did he record In Utero?
He recorded In Utero, and
That's right.
the first mix that Kurt Cobain and the record company didn't like, he did.
Yeah, it was like really raw.
But he's notorious for his desire to record what he refers to as actual acoustic instruments.
Right.
And his style is very distinctive, and you hear it in the drums.
Oh, yeah.
You hear the performance capturing style that he is known for.
I can't help but feel... So, like, The Fear is probably the rawest ZAO record out.
Yes.
And it was because they did a lot of things differently. I think they recorded everything exclusively through amps. Like they recorded the amps,
like a live sound.
Right, and so instead of just like tracking directly from their pedals and stuff, like everything went straight in, went to an amp that was mic'd and then straight into the board.
And probably the biggest change that you'll hear if you were to listen to all of their albums, even just a song or two in order, and then you get to this one and you hear Dan's vocals come in. Most 9 times out of 10, you go into a studio to record an album and you're doing your vocals. You've got a mic that is kind of hung in front of you. You're in probably a room or a hallway and you're screaming into this mic, but you're not touching it. Whereas, live, you've got a mic in your hand.
Right.
And on this record, Steve Albini put the mic in Dan's hand and said, just destroy it.
Yeah.
And that is what sounds like happens. I'm sure that every time they recorded the song, they had to get a brand new microphone.
Yeah, I mean, so the vocals on this sound very raw, and I believe it was an attempt to make the band sound live. Now, I'm not trying to be an asshole here, but like I've seen the band live plenty of times, and the vocals do not sound like the vocals on The Fear.
Yeah,
but that's okay. I mean, this was different. Like initially, I didn't like The Fear as much.
I'm still not a huge fan.
Well, okay, so the recording quality is a little weird. It doesn't sound like, because like I mean, The Funeral of God was like super clean.
I think
it was
for me. Go ahead.
It was like a very it was a very clean record. Very I don't want to say mainstream because the ZAO can only be so mainstream, but
it was very
produced album. And The Fear sounded like, I don't want to use the Saint Anger comparison, but it was definitely a step down as far as production quality goes, even though they were with this great producer, like,
yeah.
But yeah, so the record sounds sonically different, but I wouldn't say it sounds worse than like Liberate, which was also kind of a little bit lo-fi.
I think the problem for me with this record that I had was that I liked Dan's vocals the majority of the time. There's some songs I felt like it didn't work very well.
Yeah.
But like stuff like Cancer Eater and Physician Heal Thyself, it really benefited from Dan having that just, the mic in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I didn't like was how muddy the guitar and bass sounded.
Right, yeah.
You couldn't hear some of the individual things that they were doing with the guitars.
Right, and some of the songs were super technical at times,
Yeah, and it sounded like it was just a bunch of sludge kind of hitting you in the face, which sometimes that's good, but on this record, it wasn't my favorite thing. I still have some favorite songs on this record, but not very many.
Well, the material. I feel like the material itself on the album really saves it in a lot of ways. I mean, songs like, It's Hard Not to Shake with a Gun in Your Mouth, Cancer Eater, Physician Heal Thyself, Pudgy Young Blondes, American Cheats on the Deathbed, and A Last Time for Everything. Those are still, in my mind, classic ZAO songs.
Yeah.
And they encompass everything I like about the band. And it's still, like, as a fan, I'm still very much like, this is it. This is still really good. And I remember, like, my initial reaction to the record was a negative one. It's funny because there was a DVD included with the special edition of that one, and they're all watching like a Steelers game, and they're all up there like screaming cuss words at the screen, and I was like, so if you're a 15-year-old kid and you're listening to Christian music and you bring that home to your mom, well, you get what you get.
Yeah, go watch that in your living room and
Right.
You know.
No, Mom, I don't know what happened.
I guess they became possessed by the devil just for that one. For that one. I'm sorry, Mom.
I'm notoriously critical of Steve Albini's recording mantra because I understand his politics and I agree with them. Like, here's this idea where the record company makes all the money. And
Right.
he is against that. Okay, Steve, great punk rock mentality. But when he records a band like ZAO, and you say to me, okay, we're going to capture the ZAO live feel. So we're not just going to record the singer. We're going to record the singer's PA.
Right. This is what it sounds like if you're in an abandoned club in the middle of nowhere.
I sit here and say to myself, just from an engineering standpoint, okay, so if I was sitting in the club and I was ready for a ZAO show, and Dan was screaming into. Oh, I always take a hockey mask.
There you go.
If Dan's holding a mic and he's screaming into that mic, what I'm hearing come out of the PA is what he did into the mic,
right?
Not what he did into the mic coming out of the PA into another mic.
Yeah, I mean, I get that.
So I get it. The idea was let's record this band and let's try to recreate the live sound. But just like I said for Bob Rock, why does the band that is Metallica have to sound bad on purpose?
Right.
I get what you're going for, but it's not a home run. It hurts to listen to. I have to kind of psych myself up to listen to The Fear. There's good songs, just like you said, buddy. But I have to psych myself up to listen to this album because it's not enjoyable. Of course, I have to kind of psych myself up for Awake also.
Right. Well, and the band is more than welcome.
And Awake has Romance of the Southern Spirit.
Right. The band is more than welcome to correct me on this, but I feel like maybe they felt a little bit the same way because you go and listen to their next album, Awake, and it is very, for lack of a better word, it's very produced. It's more like The Funeral of God.
They makes you wonder if they listened to The Fear and decided they didn't like completely the sound that came out of that.
Right, or maybe The Fear just didn't sell well. They're like, oh, we need to get that Funeral of God sound back.
Best first half of an album ever.
Yeah,
what, on Awake?
After track 4.
See, I'm a little weird on Awake. Awake is probably my least favorite ZAO album, although I do still enjoy it because I'm a super fan and everything they put out is solid gold as far as I'm concerned. But with ZAO, I felt like I don't want to say the band sounded tired on Awake, but there were definitely songs where I felt like the band's intensity was down quite a few notches. It's hard to give the song "Human Cattle Masses" moving forward. Actually, that song kind of encompasses how I feel about the way that record sounds in places where it just sounds a little bit forced and it sounds a little bit not lazy because it's all played extremely well. It's a good record on its own. But I guess, at this point I've been listening to The Fear for 2 years and it's just like all speed and intensity and, it's like up in your face. It's like all balls. And then you listen to Awake and you're like, okay, so this is more just like a regular album.
It tends to, it goes back to a more classic speed for ZAO.
Mm-hmm.
This again, Russ had left the band again. Because he left on The Fear and he wasn't there, and so he's not
he wasn't
here
on The Fear at all, was he?
No, he wasn't there on The Fear.
He wasn't on this one either, was he?
No, he's gone on Awake as well.
His song is on Awake.
Yeah, he wrote the Romance of the Southern Spirit.
I'm listening to Romance of the Southern Spirit right now because I can.
Yeah. I remember when Awake came out. Huh?
I didn't know this. Tim Lambesis produced this record.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's weird. I never really get a urge to kill my wife when I listen to this. But
Wait. Should we have been listening to this backwards the whole time?
maybe we should have.
Okay,
I don't
just
know.
checking.
You know, I'm not going to talk about Tim Lambesis on this podcast much, but yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't realized that. Although I do remember Dan from ZAO was on an As LA Dying song off of Shadows of Security. For the life of me, I can't remember what song it is because every song on that record sounds the same. But but Dan was on one of those songs, so there you go. Go listen to it, I guess, if that's your thing. But I'm just gonna stick with listening to Dan on ZAO records.
I think we really wanted to like this album a lot more than we did.
Well, and you better like it because it's the only thing you're gonna get for like 7 years.
Yeah, because this was that album that we were waiting for 3 years because we didn't really like the Fear, and then this album came out, and it's definitely the definition of trying to justify a purchase.
Right. Oh man, dude, I pre-ordered it. I got the T-shirt, the CD, the sticker, like everything. I don't know if there was a sticker or not.
My CD is serial numbered.
One issue I have with this record, so the cymbals on the actual CD are very loud in the mix, and they hurt my ears when I'm listening to them in the car. Typically,
are you sure it's not your car speakers?
Typically, it's not my car speakers, man. This is a part. I've owned some bad cars in my day, and this is across multiple cars. They get into my earwax. They jiggle it around, and like it bothers me, and it makes the record unlistenable on CD. So what did I do? I ripped the CD to MP3s, lowered the quality a little bit, and then burned it to a disc, and that's how I listened to Awake. and so the cymbals are not nearly as bad as they are on the actual disc. And I think part of that was because the record was actually, I think more people listened to Awake via MP3 than they did the actual disc. I think you had to pre-order it to get the disc.
Yeah, there were only 8,000 made.
Yeah, so only.
And all three of us own a copy of that because we pre-ordered it, but
that's right.
There's a lot more copies of that than End of Destiny records. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that's true. Very, very true.
That's all I'm going to mention of that band. But yeah, so
as far as just because I like to be on a more positive, spin on things too. Because even though we didn't like this record, I think Quiet Passenger Part 2, the way they ended this record, was very. It's probably one of my favorite endings to a ZAO record.
Yeah. I mean, Dan has such a beautiful speaking voice, and I use beautiful in ZAO terms, in the sense that like when Dan decides it's important enough to stop the song and talk, you listen. This is important. And they ended that very well.
Yeah, almost every
a little
ZAO
depressing,
record
but
ends with a like slow, depressing type song, except for like self-titled doesn't, because that's at 0.
Yeah, self-titled's like the exact opposite of that. Yeah,
I don't remember How Are the Weak Free was the way Parade of Chaos ended. I don't remember that.
That one was a little bit slower of a song, but it wasn't like slow and depressing. But
Almost Failed ended slow. The Funeral of God ended slow. The Fear Is What Keeps Us Here.
It ended it ended weirdly. That was probably one of the more melodic songs on the record. A Last Time for Everything, which is actually one of my favorite ZAO songs. And actually, that's interesting because they take that song and they basically just reduce the quality over time until the record just kind of fades away.
Yeah. This is it's kind of funny that Self-Titled is the only one where they, kill you on their way out, but every other album,
right.
They just kind of slowly, let it go and let it fade.
Right.
Which is something I've always appreciated about all of their albums. Even though I still really love the way Self-Titled ends, but I do prefer the just, all right, let's close this record out with something that, is really good, but it's slower and it's going to be depressing.
Yeah. I think Awake was, I kind of decided that was the last ZAO album.
Yeah, because at this point, I mean, it probably, I don't think it did well, and they weren't really talking on social, or there wasn't much news of them on anything.
They weren't doing much during that time.
Dan he either did he open it up or did he join a tattoo shop?
I'm not sure.
He started really getting into tattooing since he was back home. I mean, they weren't touring. I don't think they toured this record.
Yeah.
If they did, it was only a couple of shows.
Like at the very beginning. When it came out. Yeah.
So they were all pretty much kind of back to off doing their own things.
Yeah, I mean, and that, I kind of given up on ZAO, as sad as that sounds, and it wasn't because Awake was bad. I mean, like when I say a ZAO record is bad, what I really mean is it's still better than every other album that came out that year. But in comparison to previous material by ZAO, some things I found to be lacking. I wouldn't say there really isn't a ZAO album out yet that I've been like, this one sucks, avoid it.
Yeah.
There's always something very redeeming about each record on its own. And so,
I mean, we have our favorites, but I'd say definitely in this last half of the catalog is probably my least favorite ZAO records.
Yeah, well, so the record we all want to talk about, the one that I pre-ordered on vinyl, got the T-shirt, got the, because I was like, oh my God, ZAO's coming out with a new record, and I have to have it, in my hands like right now. And instead, I waited, and then finally got it. And so the Well-Intentioned Virus came out at the end of 2016, like the very end, like December, like
December 9th.
Yeah, and that record. It's different. It's different than Awake, for sure. It's heavier than Awake. I've listened to it maybe about 15, 16 times now. Actually, on the vinyl. I haven't really listened to it digitally yet. So, the Well-Intentioned Virus, in a lot of ways, is almost more of a return to the Liberate sound a little bit. It's much more melodic than that record, but it's
And to note, On Again, Off Again, Russ is back for this album.
Right, Russ is
He's back.
Yeah.
He's touring. He's back in the band.
Are they touring? I don't know if they're touring.
I know they're performing live.
They are performing live more, yeah. So there's that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's extensive touring, but they've got a few shows that they're
right. Doing. And so the Well-Intentioned Virus, my final response on it was I like it quite a bit. There was a period where I was like, it's slower, kind of slower paced than some of the ZAO records that I've heard, but like there are fast songs in there, like Xenophobe, the Well-Intentioned Virus. Those songs are just very in your face. They're chaotic. They do the ZAO thing better than I've heard in years. And the lyrics actually I found to be the most striking on this record, because this is, in case you haven't been paying attention, this is not really a Christian metalcore album at all. There's a lot of pushback.
They've pretty much transitioned completely away from that mindset.
Right. And it's I would say that the lyrics are still hopeful in the sense that, like, we're talking about these issues. There's a really good, and I won't get into it too much because you just want to listen to that podcast. But if you go back and listen to the podcast as the story grows, there's a 2-part that has Dan, Scott, and Jeff on it, and they talk about every single song on that record, about what the lyrics are about. One of the biggest improvements I think on this record is Scott singing sounds phenomenal on this. It sounds a lot smoother, a lot more natural than his previous performances with the band. And there's a lot more like subtle melody going on in this record than what you'd had. Like,
especially in the first track, The Weeping Vessel, where, it starts off, with this dissonant melody, and then it, blasts into, this somewhat newish sounding style ZAO, but then there's like this melodic chord that they hit on this every verse. It's like they throw in this melody and then break away from it and then throw it back in.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot going on in each of the songs.
Textured.
The only criticism I really have of this record is, like, besides Xenophobe and a few of the other songs, there aren't a lot of, like, what I would call standout tracks. Not to say that it's a bad record by any means. it's a really freaking great, man, to throw on the record player and listen to all the way through.
Yeah,
In one
it's
sitting.
one of those. It's one of those albums that I unfortunately like. I don't have as much time to sit down anymore and really dissect a record.
Yo, it's ZAO. You
and
should make time.
I know. Yeah, I haven't had time to do that.
You
with
shouldn't
this
have even
one.
done this podcast. You should be listening to the Well-Intentioned Virus. And you should have just told us to suck it and not be on this podcast.
But I tend to now lately, I tend to take a song at a time when I, read the lyrics through and, stuff like that. And, this is one of those albums where I'll put on the first song, I'll hear the first song, I'll know what is going on, I'm hearing everything, and then I start working, and all of a sudden, I hear like this new sound,
right?
And it's the last track,
right?
And it's like everything from 2 to 9 has taken to me by like there's no standout songs because there's nothing that just kind of pops out of nowhere. It's a.
What about Xenophobe, man? It comes out of the gate and grabs you by the balls and slams you into the street. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It is very good. That one does pop out
yeah.
at me. But, if I'm just listening to it as background and something that pulls me away and goes, oh, what's that? It's always the first and last track, which, is not bad because those are good bookends.
Right. I really like this record because it's a lot heavier, I think, than Awake was.
Yes.
It has a more modern, heavy sound to it. There's a lot more crunch. There's a lot more balls. There's parts of the song. There's certain songs that I swear it sounds like I'm listening to Gojira. Like there's technicality there that I don't remember so much from previous because I don't consider ZAO to be an overly technical band. But
yeah,
to hear him pull some of these parts off was very new and refreshing to me, and it just feels like the band has come together more as a conglomerate. Because like if you remember Jeff Gretz's introduction to the band, it was like a huge focus on like, oh my god, our drummer's fast, so like all of our songs need to be fast too.
Yeah.
Whereas I think on this record, it's a little bit more natural. The band kind of blends together better, and
it's slower.
Yeah, and there's a more focused. There's a more focused ideas moving forward, and I've got really nothing bad to say about the Well-Intentioned Virus. But again, I'm a super fan, so it's hard for me to separate it away from that and be overly critical because for as much negativity as we want to give it, I'm gonna still listen to this over like whatever newest flavor of the week band is.
It's hard not to shake with this record in your ears.
Right, it is. It's very hard.
And this is definitely the type of record where if you want to know where a band is today, this is where they are.
Right. And I hope to hear more, going forward. But my appetite is definitely sated. I think it was worth the 7-year wait.
Yeah, I agree.
And because even like the newer Living Sacrifice albums, I was a little bit disappointed in. Whereas with ZAO, I'm getting a more consistent product, and I like it. I like the lyrics. I like the differing viewpoints we're getting from the band. Versus because ZAO at this point has run like the gamut of ideologies, and it's nice because there's so much variety. Like when you would listen to Christian hardcore bands back in the day, it's like all they would ever talk about is just one thing all the time, and like those are the first 3 ZAO records. You get to hear about the same thing for 3 records in a row. And with ZAO, you just get all this variety. You get the ups, the downs, the struggles, just the bloody details in between. And that's really what hooks me on the Well-Intentioned Virus is Dan's lyrics just really pop out to me. And they kind of gel a little bit with kind of some of my viewpoints on politics and things like that. And so it's just like, I don't know. It's comforting to me that like, during the at the end of 2016, I think there was just so much uncertainty about the world and the way things were, and for me it was just very comforting that like, okay, yeah, all this stuff's going on in the world, but my God, at least there's a new ZAO record, ZAO's got my back, they're still fighting the good fight, for me,
Yeah, and I think that's where like you mentioned Dan's lyrics, and I think that's where it's fallen apart for me right now is that I haven't been able to really go through with the lyrics and see what is going on, because I think the biggest impact that ZAO has on its sound is Dan's delivery and lyrical content.
Right.
And if you're missing that, which I have been, because I haven't been able to sit and read these lyrics, and extensively go through this album, that saves, a lot of their sound. Whereas some people may go, oh, this isn't as technical as, X band or whatever. It doesn't have to be, because, if you understand the lyrics and what he's saying, things take on a more brutal quality in that context.
Yeah.
Final thoughts on ZAO, Dan?
Buy it. All of it.
All
right
of it.
now. Yeah. If you are a metal fan or a hardcore fan and you haven't listened to ZAO, you're missing out. I mean, you're missing out on one of the pillars of metal and hardcore or metalcore or whatever you want to call it. If you're a fan of extreme music, I mean, ZAO is kind of a testament that music can be an art form. It's not about just get into a club and just circle bang for 45 minutes and that's it. I mean, with ZAO, there's this whole epic legacy there. You hear that metalcore sound evolve over the years, and you get a band that starts off just their primary focus is being heavy and being evangelical, to this band that has evolved into a mature, focused songwriting machine that deals with a variety of social issues and personal issues. And ZAO is just the complete package. I don't think it even really matters where you start. And that's my final word.
Buddy?
Man, I've got to agree with most of what Dan says there. There's not really a bad place to start. If I was going to pick a place to start, I would listen to The Well-Intentioned Virus, Self-Titled, Liberate, or Where Blood and Fire Bring Rest. Or The Funeral of God, really. Okay, just pick any album, whatever. Just friggin' listen to something by ZAO. There's nothing like them out there, and if you think you found somebody like them, and then go back and listen to ZAO, you'll realize it's definitely not the same.
Right.
There's only one ZAO.
What's your album of the week, buddy?
Ooh, album of the week. What have I been listening to mostly? I've been listening a lot to the only 2 tracks out right now by a one-man band called Death Therapy, which, if you remember a band called Becoming the Archetype, Jason Wisdom was the bass player and vocalist for that band, and he left the band a little while ago, and now he's back, and he's doing this one-man sideshow of just him with a bass and drums. And he puts his bass through so many different processes, and it has this crazy industrial sound, and it comes out at the end of the month, and I'm just like freaking out over this, because Jason Wisdom's vocals are some of the best in the business.
He's the man, yeah.
Dan?
Oh, well, so I've just been listening to Slayer because we were supposed to do the Slayer episode tonight. So I've been listening to a lot of Slayer. Okay, so preview of the Slayer episode. I'm going to go with Seasons of the Abyss by Slayer. That's my favorite one out of everything I've heard from them so far. So it's all Slayer for me right now.
I've been listening to While They Were Sleeping by Candiria.
Ooh.
And
that's because of the As the Story Grows podcast?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And I will say that if you're a fan of concept albums and progressive metal, well, number one, I'm a big fan of concept albums too.
There you go.
And if you like progressive metal, Candiria is the reason, even if you don't know it yet.
I will check it out for sure.
And on that note, I will say this has been Discography Discussion, episode 3, where we have discussed for the past hour and 40 minutes ZAO. We'll see you guys next week.
See you next week.
See ya.
Everybody knows why
Boom.
Can I get a fart,
man.
buddy?